Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a recap from last Saturday. Uh, a lot of stuff got introduced, an overview of how websites work. Does anybody that was not here kind of have an idea maybe of how it works? Or like an impression maybe of how the web works?
So it's all like client server stuff.
Client server. And then what do you think when you hear that?
Like a client is requesting information and the server is like where everything is.
Yeah, that's pretty much it at its most basic level. I don't know if you guys heard the intro from last class, but the way I see it is kind of like a restaurant. I think of you go to a restaurant, you order something, and then the kitchen cooks your meal and it's brought out to you. The customer is the client, and the restaurant is the server. You don't necessarily know how the meal gets prepared, but you have a menu where you can have a certain list of instructions on how to order your food. And that's how I see the client and server dynamic. One thing to always remember is that there are two different places that are very distinct, where usually the client is the browser and the server will be running on a computer somewhere, whether it be locally, which is happening here, or on a server out in the cloud somewhere, running most likely on Linux, but we have a lot of Microsoft servers too. But at its essence is a computer running some code. And it can be PHP, it can be Java, it can be Python, C++, you name it. On the client side, though, the only code, or I guess programming code that is happening is JavaScript. You have CSS and HTML, but those are more for styling and the structure of the page. But the only other program that is running on the client side is JavaScript. There are many flavors of JavaScript, and we're not going to get into, I don't think we're going to see any JavaScript right now, but that is essentially how that works. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so the main thing I want to get across, and something that you see a lot and you might want to try to remember, is the concept of, let me see if I have it here. The acronym that is used a lot is CRUD, and it stands for create, read, update, and destroy. And these are the concepts of what you do with an object. If you think about any resource in real life, you can store things, you can grab them, you can maybe modify them in some sort of way or throw them away. And the philosophy is that if you model your data or your application to only have those four, you should be able to manage your data by having only those four actions. On the right-hand side, you have the verbs, the HTTP verbs: post, get, put, and it's the same as patch for the most part. There are some slight differences, but they're not significant right now. And delete. I think Jared mentioned last class about mapping, and what that means, mapping, is that they're just equivalent to each other whenever they need to be used. And that's where it gets a little tricky, because you have to remember, oh, am I using the CRUD names here, or am I using the HTTP verbs here? But over time, you'll learn to know which ones are used. So I'm going to go and review a little bit from last class as well. You can see that happening in the client side. This might be a little too small. Let me see if I can. So right now, well, I have nothing here. This is not a website that is working. Let me go to Google. As you can see, there's a bunch of get methods, and here's the status of those methods applied to the server. So the client is making this request with a get method, and this is what came back from the server. And I showed this website I like a lot called HTTP Cat, in case you guys need a reference. And here are the codes. So one that you encounter a lot is the 404, not found. Let's go back. You got 200, which is okay. That's everything went all right. It's very common. And there are many others. All of these are just available as a standard, but it is really up to you as the server builder, I guess, so to speak, to add the codes that you want to add. There are, for example, Sinatra right now, it adds magically codes into certain requests, but you can override that, or you can create your own behavior. And let's see. Right here we see the different categories. Anything that starts with the 1 is informational, 2 success, 3 redirection, 4 client error, and 500 server error. So do we understand that when would a client error occur versus a server error occur? Does anybody have a guess? Mm-hmm.
Server error, server can process the request.
Yeah, that's good in a nutshell. So you'll see a lot of client errors where like you put it wrong URL or you send the wrong parameters. Server errors, maybe your server is not set up properly to handle the logic that you put into it. Like you'll see 500s are a lot where you have logic that's not right inside the server. And so server errors out and it doesn't know what it is. And you get the 500 server error. So that's basically it in a nutshell. Let's see what else we got. So I introduced this little application or gem. Where is it? Oh, I think I know where it is. Called Sinatra. And Sinatra is a gem. For those that were not here, a little quick overview of what a gem is you may have heard of libraries. I don't know. Libraries are just another set of, it's a bundle of code that somebody wrote, maybe a company or a group of people, maybe just a single person, that is available out there for you to include into your code base. And so there are many things, many different shapes of libraries or gems that do different things and different behaviors. In fact, Rails is a gem in itself. So in this case, Sinatra, what it does is it gives you like a lightweight version of Rails. It's just a quick way for you to make an application that perhaps is not too complex. And it just gets you started down one path. The way that you install gems is you just run the command gem install and then the name. So I can just do gem install Sinatra. And I'm not going to do that right now because it takes a little bit to install, and I already have it installed. And usually it's very helpful to go through the documentation. Anything that's just a soft skill, I guess, about developing is you always, any tool that you get in contact with that is new, you want to go through the documentations at least once or maybe superficially, because there might be functionality that you don't know is out there available to you, and you're going to start doing more things that you need to, and it might just be available already there. Get to that. So here it is. This is just a regular vanilla file, just empty. Just make a new file, and usually it's app.rb or myapp.rb, or it can be any name. And up here you see the require that includes the gem that you just installed, and that gives you access to all the methods that are built into that library or gem.
This is through Ruby, right?
Ruby, yep. So it's all based on Ruby. And let's see. You can see here, this is sort of a skeleton app I have ready. I'm requiring the base of Sinatra. This is stuff that it's not too advanced, but I'm not gonna. It's a little bit of scope from the class. Just know that I am bringing in a JSON support and Pry, which is a debugger. I think I mentioned it before. Just so that we can see what is happening. JavaScript object or JavaScript simple object notation, I want to say. Let me make sure. I think I have it.
You can tell me if it's for the album inventory, like convert the text into the object into a hash.
Yes. Yeah. And so remember we just mentioned that a server can be any language, right? It could be PHP, could be I don't know, all those languages. And so JSON, what JSON does is it standardizes the way that data gets sent to and forth, which is, you'll hear the term normalize or serialize. And so most, if not all, languages support JSON. So it's essentially a translation. If I have a client and the client needs data, and I don't know if it's going to be Ruby or Python, how do I talk to it? Well, there's going to be a bridge between those languages called JSON, and they both understand that JSON format. And in fact, if you can see here, what does this resemble from Ruby land?
You're creating instances, right?
An instance?
Or a class? Or a method?
Just this right here. What does that look like? Anything we've been exposed to before?
Variables.
Was that
Variables.
variables? Not quite, but close.
Objects?
Object. Okay, that is called an object actually in JSON. But for Ruby, if this were Ruby, what does this look like?
Array.
Yep, this right here is an array. That's right. Now, what is this?
An array.
Nope. I heard some. What did you say? It is a hash. Yeah.
Oh.
It does resemble a hash. You have the curly brackets. You have your key value, key value, key value, key value pair. And
it looks different here than we use the C example. You do the album inventory and you tell it to write it to the file. That's actually how it writes it out, the hash.
yeah. So, and then JSON in reality is just a string that gets parsed. And this is what I mean. Let me see if I can get this to work. I'll just bear here for a second. So the way that you start server is you just run the file like you would run any script. And here we go. Now we don't, normally on another file, it would just run the code, exit out. But Sinatra, what is Sinatra doing here is starting a server and it's on listening the whole time until you stop it. So right now it's going on and it's listening on port 4567. And this is just for the purposes of looking at a JSON. So I'll explain what I'm doing in a second. Okay. So let's see. Let's do a hash. Right? We have a hash. Assign it to a variable. It's the same one. Now, if I convert this to a JSON, that's a string, right? We have characters inside of quotes. And the way that this is understood by all of the other languages is by the backslashes and the colons. So this is universal. So by the time this string gets to another place, they know how to parse that into whatever they understand on their other side. Now I can take this and convert it back. Oh, let's see. Oh, that's not it. It's, sorry, it's JSON. There's a class in Ruby, in fact, being brought in by this require, that provides an object that parses JSON. Are we confused by that? Does anybody have any questions of what just happened here?
Why do you have to call JSON.parse and then H2 JSON?
That's a good question, because H is hash. And if you just parse hash, it doesn't know how to parse a hash.
So when you did H2 JSON a while back,
Yeah.
you didn't actually change the hash.
No, it just simply mutated it back to what it was before.
Okay.
But that's essentially what it happens in any JSON consuming client. Is it takes a string, converts it to JSON, then the server takes JSON, converts it to whatever, whether it be a hash or an array.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to work on, we're going to build a very simple application that creates a list. And if we have time, we're going to incorporate some authentication. It's going to be very simple, again, just so that people understand the concept. It's not going to be super secure, obviously. Then please stop me if you have any questions. So right here, there's a new concept. I don't think you guys have been exposed to this data structure. It's called a constant. They're all caps in Ruby. And think of them as a variable that is always gonna live as long as the application is alive. So anytime, the whole time the server is running, this variable is gonna be available to you. In fact, right now I'm inside of debugger, so I can look at it. And there it is. It exists. as just a hash. And it can be anything. You're not going to use them too much right now or in the near future. I just have it there because it's a stand-in for a database. Eventually, you're going to have a database, or maybe write to JSON, and then kind of like the project that we had before. So for people that were not here, we have different methods in Sinatra. And so you have get, post, patch, delete. The order of them do not matter. You can have post, patch, get, delete. And the thing that's going to be a little confusing is that we learned in Ruby before that a class has access to its own methods, right? So we have a class here that inherits from Sinatra. And so when we learn Ruby, we think as all one thing, right? Here, the dynamics is a little different because each method is going to be what is known as an endpoint. The client is going to hit one of those methods individually. And whatever happens inside each of those methods cannot be shared across. Whereas, remember, when you have two methods, you can call that method with the other method. And here, you don't really have access. Anything that goes on here will not be seen here. Does that make sense?
So you can call the post method from the end.
Correct. However, if I have a method I do have access to that in either of these endpoints. So that's a little bit of a difference from your regular Ruby, and that's what Sinatra brings in to this dynamic.
Are those the only 4 methods you have from Sinatra?
No, there's a lot more.
The basic ones?
This is the basic ones, just the ones that map to CRUD. Yeah, and then eventually you'll see more like options and just more advanced stuff. Yeah. So right now we know that we have a database and we have a get action, and this is the URL. So that's what I did here. I have the port that this server is listening into. And so it responds with the JSON version of the database. So this client knows how to interpret JSON and display it. So I could do this just for illustration purposes. I stop the server so I can reload the code. So I'm going to restart the server and refresh. Any questions about that? Okay. So these are called routes. You have a route to the list URL. Like if I tried something else, Sinatra will tell me, I don't know what that is. You don't have a method that tells me what to do with that request, with that question. Yeah. And in fact, it gives you a suggestion as to how to fix that. So if we wrote this in our application, then it would say, hello world. Let me The inspector. Whoa. So we have a 404 status because it was a client error. The client asked the wrong question. The server knew how to handle it and say, hey, you asked me the wrong thing. I'm going to give you a 404 status. And that response, let's look at it. And as you can see, the response on that request is the HTML version of what is happening here. Now let's go back to the one that does work. And we have a 200 OK status method get. And if I check it, it's the same data that was sent back. So far we're good, right? I imagine. Okay. Okay. Now let's say we want to add data to the database. How do we have any guesses as to how that could happen?
Add stuff to the database.
Yeah. Like I said, in plain English, what would be your solution?
Writing stuff to it.
Yeah. And to what?
To the database.
Yeah.
Just adding information to the hash. Like, is that what you're, or to an actual file? Okay, so
You should have to make a method, a separate method, in order to add data into the database.
You could.
Or at the top, you could just put some info in there.
You could. Yeah. Yeah. You could. And the simple way to do it in this case, since it's a very simple app, is we can look at DB and maybe create a new record. Now, here's the thing, right? So we said that these methods don't share information with each other. So how do we get information into the database?
Would it be better to call a method outside that? No.
You could, but we want the information from the client, right?
do you even gets?
Hmm?
Does gets work here?
Get is to read.
No, gets.
Gets. Oh, gets. So yeah. So I like those kind of questions because now we're starting to feel like the difference in terms of mechanics between Ruby and web development. So on Ruby, if you wanted to get input from the user, you would do gets, and then they would have to use the terminal to get your string. Well, gets doesn't work on Chrome because there's no terminal for you to put anything into. So how do you move information from the client to the server? And that's okay. I didn't expect you to know this, but there is method inside of Sinatra called params, which stands for parameters. And then I'm going to show you a way, in case you guys ever feel lost, this is what I usually do in order to get my bearings. I just put in a binding.pry. And if anybody needs help, send that up. I'm available. And then all of those changes need to be refreshed. So I'm going to kill the server. Start it. And I'm going to refresh. Okay, so nothing happened. Why did nothing happen?
You haven't entered anything.
I haven't entered anything. That's one theory. Does anybody else have a different theory? Okay, that's fine. The tricky part, and I'm sorry, I'm keep asking tricky questions, but that's just the way that I like to discover things, like why something didn't work. The reason for that is because when you submit a URL, what method are you doing? The get. So this never gets hit because this is a post request. So if I wanted this pry to be hit by this client, I would have to move it to the get action. And let's see. Yep, look, now we are in the debugger right here in the server. And since I use pry, I have like this way. Usually you could do methods, I believe. Yeah. Remember we have something dot methods. I'm essentially doing self dot methods to see what is available for methods. It's a lot of them, right? I like binding.pry because it allows me to go to the ones that are here. So here we go. This is Sinatra-based methods, is what I'm inheriting from right here. This is what the gem is bringing in. And as you can see, we have app, forward, params. The important ones are, they're all important, but like the ones that you're gonna see more commonly is params, request, response, and EMV. Let's inspect them. What does params look like? An empty hash. Yep. Let's look at request. Oh, it's a bunch of stuff, right? So all of this information is sent by Chrome as metadata. It's just data that Chrome adds to the request. For now, I'm not gonna get too much into that, but it's just something good to know that it's there. Let's look at the response. This is the response that Sinatra is gonna send back after it's done executing the code. And as you can see, there's a status right here. So, oh. Looks like the code, doesn't it? Response status 200, okay. And we have header. And so just very quickly, requests and responses have a header and a body. And I think something else, but I honestly can't remember. It's 3 parts, but the most common ones are header and body. And it's just another thing that is good to know. But for now, let's see how we can pass information into the database. So normally when you go to a website, you'll see a bunch of nonsense after you do the URL. And that nonsense tend to be the data that the client is sending to the server, or at least some of it. And then I can reproduce it here. And let's do what we had before, test. And let's see what that does. Sinatra automatically saw that string, parsed it out, and converted it into a hash. If we look at the class, we have a hash. And if we look at params test, it's just Ruby. It works the same as any other hash in Ruby. So that's your kind of like it's a little bit of a replacement from your gets. Instead of doing gets, you get in parameters from your client, and then using that data however you want. Back to demonstrate, I can put, let's see, I can say name. That might not work, actually. I don't think this is going to work, to be honest. Let's see. Let's try it out. Sometimes Sinatra gets hung up. Yeah, so we have an error. Do we know why this is not working? Do we have a guess? We have undefined method plus for nil class. It's a little tricky, but problem is up here. See, that's called test. When it goes over there and it tries to call params name, there's no key name, so name is nil. Oh, I don't need to save requests. Right, so it works, and the database. Now this is named incorrectly because it works is not a name, but I can change that pretty easy. I can say, David. And it dynamically changes to anything I pass to that parameter. How do we feel about this so far? Let me know if I'm going too fast or if there are any confusing things, or if you're just processing, that's cool too.
Huh?
Huh?
I don't think I'm even processing.
Okay. What do you mean? Like you get it or you don't, not following too much?
I mean, it makes sense, but I don't think I get it.
Okay, that's fair, and that's cool. That's totally cool. I'm gonna show another way. Let's see. Do we understand what try does? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. All right. Let's try the same request now, but we're gonna stop it and inspect what's going on. Oh, I didn't start my server. Oh. Okay. So what do we want to look at here? What are we interested in right now? The list? Okay.
Use the get method. I guess, right?
Yeah, right. And what is happening in our logic right now?
So the debugger opens up.
Yeah.
Now you're creating a variable full name
Right.
and assigning it the value of a hash.
Yes. So we want to see. Let's see if that hash is okay. Now the confusing part about this is that params doesn't exist anywhere, right? Before, like, where did params come from, right?
Well, the
Well,
parameters are the stuff that you're passing it in the search box, right?
yep. But you know how, like, if this was plain Ruby, params would give you an error, right? Because it would say you have not defined this method or this variable. And that's where, like, I understand why it's a little confusing, because it's a jump, because params is being provided by Sinatra as a method that says, okay, when I have a client sending me data, I'm going to automatically put that into the params method. So anytime you send any sort of data up here or in the body of the request, it will get attached to parameters. So let's play the next line. And now we can see that name is anything. And so the last line on that method is going to concatenate anything plus the string version of database. And that's how that works. The last thing that happens on the method gets returned as a response to the client. If we look at the request right here, we can see that the query string parameters are name and anything. The response is anything, and then I have an OK 200. I think I can override that. Let's try it. Now we have a get with a status 301. That might mean something different. So you're not restricted to, there's nobody that's going to force you to do the correct combination of status codes. You do want to abide to some sort of standard because you want to confuse your users. But there's nothing rigid about the combination of behavior and status codes. In fact, like I think I mentioned it before, your get status could potentially delete records. Obviously, you don't want to do that, but it is something that is not out of possibilities for it happening.
So in any, are you calling post in any way, shape, or form?
Not yet, and that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question because I'm gonna do a little bit of. I'm gonna get away from the browser for a second because doing a post on the browser, it's not tricky, but it's different because when you do a post in the browser, you're dealing with forms. You're dealing with input. You know, sometimes you fill in your name or password. Anytime you input something, that's your post request. There's not really a way for you to do a post request in the address bar. Everything that happens up there is a GET request. So let's simulate the post request for a second. See if I can get this. Yeah. I have to do a whole other tab better. So we used a little bit of curl before, right? To download text. And curl it's another client. I mean, if you think about it, curl is making a request to a server. It might not be graphical, but does the same job of asking for information and it returning that to you. So I already have one ready. We have the curl command -d turns this into a post request with these parameters, and this is the URL. So let's see if that works. The way I check it usually is, I'll add another right here. If my server doesn't stop, I know that I'm doing something wrong. All right, let's try that. I think that worked because it's kind of stuck. It's froze, like there's nothing happening. And if you see on this side, there it is. So what do we want to inspect first?
That DB exists.
Let's see. It does exist. Yep. And then we also have parameters. Now, what is going to happen here on this line?
Are you going to assign them? Where are you getting your parameters from?
Where am I getting my parameters?
Yeah.
We're looking at them.
So you assign those to record?
Yep. Now it's a little tricky here because I think I didn't complete what is actually gonna get assigned to the key record on database.
Or new?
New.
So the key gets assigned.
Yep. It would be, the key would be a hash, or the key would be record, and the value would be a hash, new Jorge.
Oh, okay.
Let's
The whole object.
yeah, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. So I'm gonna exit that. Oh, I got an error message. No implicit conversion of array into string. Okay. So what happened here is that the last line is what gets sent back as a response. And with
JSON.
yes, exactly. We have to JSON it. So we just send it back again. So let's try that. In fact, the record probably got updated. Let's make sure. Let's try that. And now we have a way to access. Well, I changed this, so I probably should put it back to how it was. Let's see. Now, the reason it's empty is because I killed the server. Remember that this variable lives only as long as the application lives. So let's try the post request again. Oh, and see the curl command, the response that I got says internal server error. So this is the string version of the response from the server when it couldn't deal with that array error. So let's try it again. Params, yep. And okay, let's see what we got. We got this as a response. It's a hash with the key record that has a value of a hash. And let's look at list.
So inception.
What do we think it's going to show when I do list? Just the get method.
That. It's probably gonna be the record, new.
Yep.
Order.
Yep. Yep. Because that database just got updated with a post request with information.
So that constant is a dynamic static.
Yeah. You probably shouldn't use it that way,
Yeah.
but this is just a stand-in for a database. And in fact, we can do another request. Let's try. I don't know. Server is stopping it. Let's let it through. Okay, and let's refresh. So what happened there? We only have one record. So how come?
We don't have a way to actually save what we're putting in and add to the pin to the hash. So this is using a hash every time. The hash starts off empty, and when it runs the code, it's making it empty hash, right? And then putting the new information in.
That's a good guess, but that's not what's happening. It's a little bit trickier than that.
So wait, what was the question?
Remember we had new Jorge, right?
Right.
How come it got overridden?
Go back to your curl thing. Because you passed in the parameters, right?
Yeah.
So the value of the parameter is title equals text.
Yeah. So there's a bug in my code. Like the logic inside of my method is buggy. That's what's causing the problem. Why, if I want to add a record to the database, what would I need to do instead? I have crappy code right now.
Yeah. And so what you're saying is that instead of just renaming the same record,
Mm-hmm.
you just want to add it to the DB, right? Or to the record.
Yep. Yeah.
Adding to the record.
No, keep adding to the DB.
DB.
Yeah. And there are many ways to solve this. So like, don't feel like there's just one solution.
Instead of record, because it's using record for the key
Yeah.
or whatever you're putting in.
Yeah.
You may want to accept input for a new key and then input for the value.
Good. That's very good. So
What you do with the separate method?
you could, yeah. So I'm thinking, there's something simple that might be dynamic is we know that we have, let me fire this again. We have params, right? What if we did params keys? What does params keys do? They give you all the keys. Now this is an array. So in order to get, I could do keys first to get access to the actual key. So how about, now I know that that works. So let's see. not redundant, right? Does that make sense?
So you keep adding it to the first position, right? Or the first value of the hash.
Yep. This might not work, but let's see what it does.
Also, key and the value are the same thing.
So we're looking, this database is a hash, right? And so we're passing whatever the keys of the params is, and we're creating that key. And over here, we're accessing the value of params. So I don't know if the hash, let me see. I don't want to lose you guys, so let me see if I can make a simpler way. That doesn't work. So we know the params keys first is title. Because if we just look at params, first key is title, right? So if title is the first one and then I pass it again, that is the actual value, because the thing inside of the brackets is evaluating to title, and I'm accessing Tetris. And then over here, I'm creating the key on database. Let's see if that's the case. Oh, so I made a rookie mistake. I did not kill the server, so none of the code got updated. Let's try it again. And let's refresh. Now let's try to add a second record. Let's see, I don't know, song. What happened? Oh, I think it's just my terminal. So the key to this is not whether you're doing it correctly or not, but it's just to illustrate that whatever logic that you put inside that method, that's what's going to happen whenever a post request gets executed to the route. This is the method that gets called. Same thing with patch, and same thing with delete. And so you can have logic inside of either one that might not do that, but just know that they get mapped to the action that the client is requesting. Yeah, no problem. What time is it? Okay, we have time. All right, so does anybody have any questions? I know it's a lot, and no questions are like too crazy or anything like that. Okay, so let's try to do a full loop. Let's try to add a record, update it, and then delete it. Just the one record. So let's see. Let's I think an easy way also to make this more understandable is maybe we merge it in. Do we know what merge is in Ruby? So what merge does is it merges two hashes together. I'll show it right here. So you have that's the first hash, and this I can't do numbers. H2. Right, we got two hashes. Then if I do H merge B, no, sorry, H2, puts all the keys and values together into one hash. So that's a little bit more understandable, right? Now I know that I have a hash, and whatever hash I pass in as parameters is just going to get appended into. And let's test that's actually working. Something I do usually. That. Let me start this. It's funky. Okay. Actually, I'm going to take out that. I'm going to take this out just so it doesn't stop the server every time. Okay. So that did not work. And I don't know why it didn't work, to be honest. Let's see. So when something doesn't work, usually I go to the log and see what happened. Let me refresh that. So the server is getting hit. Maybe the constant doesn't, maybe the method doesn't work on the constant. Okay. We're getting parameters. Let's try that line of code. Yep. Looks like the database doesn't get updated with that. You see that we do this and then DB still stays empty. So it looks like it doesn't work for constants, so that method is not good. Let's see if, let me try something else. Yep, doesn't work. Okay. So I guess it has to be that way, the other way. Okay. So sorry about that. Merge doesn't work.
Maybe not, but I was wondering, would it work if you turned what you typed into it? You know, your friends, that what you got was a hash. But it's not. It's,
What do you mean?
when you typed in like song equals stairway, that's not a hash. Yeah, you can add it to a hash, but it's not a hash. So it would merge. You were adding two hashes together. If you do merge
Oh,
with just what you put in, you're merging it with something that's not a hash. So you're adding a hash to a string.
that's a good question, and essentially that's what happens is that by the time the query gets to Sinatra, under params, it's already a hash.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Sinatra takes care of grabbing that query and turning it into a hash. So it will always be a hash when it's in parameters. Let me make sure that it's working. We have first record. I don't know if that worked. Let's see. No. Oh, I still have. The problem with this is that it's gonna, whatever I pass it again, it's gonna override the results. So one way to do it is I could push it into an array. I can turn the value of results into an array. And then I can push parameters onto that array, into this array. And let's see if that works. Okay, let's refresh over here. That works. Let's try second record. Still getting overwritten. Not sure why. Let's see. Let's make sure that's the case. That shouldn't be happening. See. Okay. So I'm trying to push the parameters onto this array, but it doesn't seem to be working. Let me make sure that I got this right. Yeah, this should work. I think it has to be here. Okay. First record, third record. I think that's working. Let's see. So we have results, and then there's an array of what I'm passing it. It doesn't really matter. I can do foo bar, and then if I refresh here, there's the third one, foo bar, and then you keep adding records to it that way. There's just one way to do it. It's a very primitive way, but it's just to illustrate that you can add to a database and then get that from a GET request. So what does patch mean? Patch means that you're updating an existing request. So let's try to work the logic on that. So we're saying if there's a record that matches a key inside, we want to update that. How do we do that?
You want to modify the value of the key?
Mm-hmm.
Key itself. So you can do although it's an array now.
Yeah.
So we have to call it the array and modify based on the index number.
Yeah, that's it's kind of close, yeah. Yeah, you have an array, so how do you check an array?
Give it the index number.
You don't really necessarily need the index. So if you have data and you have a collection, how do you check each one of them?
I think you do a loop.
Yeah.
To or the array each check if it matches this equals this, then this equals the new.
Yeah. So if you say it out loud, like in English, it helps a little bit. Like you want to look at each record inside that array. And if the key matches the key that is being passed, update that record. So let's see if we can write that. So we have CtD false. Now let's see. I think it's the, in this case, we want to each through,
They have to do two each, do it each for the array and then each for the. Are these still in hash? They're not hash inside.
yeah, there.
Like inception.
Yeah, it's a lot of, let me think about this. You have to, find, you guys haven't seen find, but it's an iterator. I don't think that'll work actually. Sorry, let me see if I can, because I think I deviated a little bit of what I have prepared. And so I have to loop through this array.
I think it probably would have been easier with the other code where you just cut the hash and added key value pairs to the hash. Then you could just do
Instead of adding it to the,
instead of adding it to the array.
yeah, you're probably right. Let's,
You could just go through the hash.
yeah, let's try that. I think it was, then again. And this is empty. And so, yeah, that does make it a lot easier. Let's make sure that's working first. Yeah, that is working. It's intended. Okay. So if we want to modify an existing record, all we have to do is if db params keys first, and db so essentially, if the database has a key that matches the parameters or the keys on the parameters, we're going to update that value. So we know that our database already has foo bar. Well, I have to kill the server again and restart. Let me do those requests. We got one, and then we have third. Let's make sure that's the case. So we want food to be, I don't know, mouse. So we need to do a patch request. And you don't have to remember this, but just to I believe you do this. That did not go well. Let's see. So it updated. Oh, it updated third to third because I passed this and I have a problem here. I am not accessing actual params. I'm just passing the keys. So that's not correct. So let's try that again. Let's do. Sorry, my terminal is just not cooperating with me today. Let's restart that. So let's do foo. Let's do third record. Oh, never mind. That one. Okay. Let's make sure that's working. And we want to update foo to mouse, right? So in order to do that, we do the patch. So make sure I fix it. What's going on with my? So I'm sending a patch action with the parameters foo and the value mouse. And oh wow. Oh. Yeah. Okay. And now we see that the existing record got updated to mouse. But that's something like the key thing to understand in here is that that's nothing magical that Sinatra did for you. You came up with it. Well, we came up with that logic, right? And it could be anything. And as long as it makes sense in the context of a response, then that's what the application is going to do. Obviously, websites get a little bit more complex, but that is the core function of an application. So let's delete foo right now. So what we can do is, let's say, this is a function. This is a Ruby function that deletes the key on a hash. So if it finds it, it deletes it. And then we display the database back. Let's see if that works. So I have to restart the server. Okay. Let me create some records because right now there's probably nothing. Yep. So again, creating one right there, and then just create that one. So which one do we want to delete? Third or foo? Doesn't really matter. Foo. All right, let's delete foo. So we're changing the action from patch to delete.
The X in front of it?
Huh?
The X in front of it.
Yeah, the X means that pass this action to the server, and that did not work because something wrong with the command. Okay. Yeah, there's no space. There we go. Oh, and this needs to go. Okay, there was an error. Let's see what the error is. Did not like delete. What is the lead key from hash movie? Ah, okay. I need to pass the actual key. So this is wrong syntax. Should be okay. Create new records. We got 1. We got 2. And now we're gonna make sure that those records are right. Yep. And now we're gonna delete. We have the action. Oh, that's not right. It should be action delete. And pass in this parameters. And it's done. Because we added that logic to the delete action. And it responded with this data. So that's a very simple application. Just updates some data structure, and then it can edit that data. It can update it, and then it can delete stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of edge cases here that could happen, but it's just an illustration of how the dynamic between the client and the server works. Your client could be either the browser or curl or anything that makes a request to the server. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess printing key range, but not really. You tried to show me before, and I guess I did it wrong. But how to change the key and leave the value? Change the key.
How to change the key and what else?
The value remained the same, but just change the key.
Oh, you would have to write logic that would create a new key value pair with the same value and then destroy the previous one. So essentially you would be creating a new key value and then the previous one just go away. That's what I would do. Yeah. But there's no method, as far as I know, there's no method in Ruby that says find this value and change the key on this hash. I think that's what I got so far for today. Unless somebody else has more questions in terms of how it works, or maybe something that they might be confused about. I know it's a lot. and like it takes a second to get used to this. It's just more practice, but this dynamic is going to help you out to understand Rails more, because Rails is even more quote unquote magical, meaning more things happen in the on the background. Rails does more work for you than you see explicitly in the code. Whereas here you can see a lot of things are happening because you coded it in, but Rails does a lot of things by convention, so that if you follow the convention, it will just work. And then just knowing how those things just work are better understood if you understand this concept. For next class, I'm going to try to add views so that our application looks more like an actual website and not just a data reader. But I just wanted to go through this so that we saw how the backend behaves. Like, backend's responsibility is just to send back data, and then the client interprets that however it wants to. So unless anybody else has anything else, I think should be good for tonight.